if Manfred had, let's say Manfred had punished them, do you really think people have just forgotten about it at that point? Like let's say they all got
Yeah.
10 games. I mean, one of the tricky things here, it would have been interesting had he tried to punish them, is how do you assign blame for a team-wide cheating scandal? Do you punish all the hitters the same? Do you try to read into who used it the most? Do you care about regular playing time?
Yeah.
If you're only on the team for 20 days, you know, and I think that's part of the reason there is still debate about it is it's messy. The whole thing is so messy. You know,
Yeah.
it's not as simple as A-Rod used some PEDs, Barry Bond, whatever.
Yeah.
Those are much neater and kind of intellectually easy to deal with than a team-wide cheating scandal. And, you know, there is an anecdote in the book where Altuve is happy they're going back home toward the end of the season. I think it was actually entering the postseason at 17 because they're going to have the boom, boom, boom. He made a little noise.
Right.
You know, and so look, even if he wasn't using it, he still stood by. He
Yeah.
still might have enjoyed the results of it, might have even, you know, in that tiny way, at least encourage it. And so, you know, it's just, well, he didn't use it. Does that really absolve blame? AJ Hinch didn't use it. Does that absolve blame? Obviously,
Right.
that's an unfair comparison. But it's just none of this is neat, and I think that's part of why we're still talking about it.
Yeah, it doesn't fit the narrative or the like standard of individual blame and accountability that like we are so used to framing punishment decisions on, right? Like this was a team-wide organizational decision, and again, this sort of gets to the larger issues at play here, which is that it kind of filtered down from the top, and it's not like, I mean, I do think there are a lot of similarities actually to the steroid thing in terms of this sort of like players existing in this limbic state of guilt and innocence, right? Where like we don't actually know if a player did steroids, but we kind of think he did, and we, you know, we decide they're guilty anyway because of the evidence seems strong, or like depending on which fan you ask, I think this player did, or I think this player didn't, or I think this player did steal steins, I think this player didn't because I just like that guy more and I don't think he would do something like that. And I think this kind of is an interesting transition to Jeff Luhnow, who you mentioned, and is sort of the main character of the book, the villain. I don't know how you want to frame it, but you know, he's like in some ways he's the fall guy, right? He's the only one who was really run out of the league, except I guess Brandon Taubman. Also, he's on the ineligible list, I think, although that was separate from the sign stealing stuff.
He's been technically reinstated, but he hasn't come back in.
Yeah, and so Luhnow is no longer works in baseball. I think he runs a soccer team or something.
Multiple.
Yeah, and so and he's, but it's so funny to read this story. Like he comes off as a very unpleasant person in the book. I think I can say that relatively fairly. He does not seem like somebody who would like to work for. But as I was reading the book, I felt like this is such a familiar type of character in the culture, right? This guy who like comes from McKinsey, has this sort of like, you know, tech consulting background, who likes the idea of like disrupting an industry or something. And if things were like 2 degrees different, right? If the scandal hadn't been exposed, if, you know, people for some reason didn't care about the sign stealing, like you could see him being celebrated as like a hero or as like a genius. And like there's still people who think of him as this like maybe evil genius, but still like kind of this brilliant mastermind. And, you know, it comes back to this idea of like, you know, the title of your book, which is very good, I think, Winning Fixes Everything. It's like the team did have all this on-field success and still has. I mean, they've been in the ALCS now, was it 7 years in a row or however many years in a row they have all this on-field success. But like, you know, it fixes everything for the fans and for some people, but like it didn't fix everything for Luhnow. It didn't fix everything for a lot of the people who worked in that organization who had miserable experiences and players who were kind of screwed over by the organization. And so I'm curious like what your perception of Luhnow is and what you think, like why does he come off the way he comes off, I guess?
Yeah, and you know, to your point that I forget the word you just used about you wouldn't like, he can be very charming. You know, it's not that every interaction with him is bad. And this is where you know, there's shades of gray to all of this, and kind of a two-faced nature to all of it. I mean, and it is the title of the book. You know, I think if you were to look right now at, say, Amazon's top selling baseball books or whatever, go to some other website that ranks this. I don't know. There is another website that ranks it, but that's at least publicly available. You know, most of them are going to be kind of the happy narratives,
Yeah.
and this is what fans and people want. They, sports teams are distractions. You want to love your guys and root, all that stuff. And so a lot of the narratives, get geared this way. And what you encounter with the Astros, and what I encountered directly with the Astros, is kind of the rare example where the bottom line result actually in the end is not the overpowering thing. They did win the World Series, right? They had it. They still have it. They have the title, and yet that is not where the conversation ends. It keeps going.